In the dead of night, when the moon is high and ill winds blow, and the banshees cry and the moonlight casts an unearthly glow, arise, my love, with tales of woe.
Good evening. It is 12 midnight, the paranormal hour. Welcome to Ghost to Ghost. I'm your host, Chief Lawson. Ghost to Ghost is a podcast to discuss all paranormal and parapsychology subjects. You can find Ghost to Ghost on all major formats, so tell your friends, tell your family. Come listen to Ghost to Ghost. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Ghost to Ghost. Tonight's topic, the legend of Sleepy Hollow and its origins. My guests tonight are Jennifer Verne, research manager and podcast producer.
Good evening.
My case manager, Heather Lawson, and podcast director.
Hello.
And, of course, myself. Welcome to our broadcast, and let's get underway.
In the dark shadow of the grove, on the margin of the brook, he beheld something huge, misshapen, black and towering. It stirred, but seemed gathered up in the gloom, like some gigantic monster ready to spring upon the traveler. The hair of the affrighted pedagogue rose upon his head with terror. What was to be done? To turn and fly was now too late, and besides, what chance was there of escaping ghost or goblin, if such it was, which could ride upon the wings of the wind? Summoning up, therefore, a show of courage, he demanded in stammering accounts, "Who are you?" He received no reply. He repeated his demand in still more agitated voice. Still there was no answer. Once more he cudgeled at the sides of the inflexible gunpowder, and shutting his eyes, broke forth with involuntary fervor into a psalm tune. Just then the shadowy object of alarm put itself in motion, and, with a scramble and a bound, stood at once in the middle of the road. Though the night was dark and dismal, yet the form of the unknown might now in some degree be ascertained. He appeared to be a horseman of large dimensions, and mounted on a black horse of powerful frame. He made no offer of molestation or sociability, but kept aloof, on one side of the road, jogging along on the blind side of old Gunpowder, who had now got over his fright and waywardness. Ichabod, who had no relish for this strange midnight companion, and bethought himself of the adventure of Brom Bones with the galloping Hessian, now quickened his steed in hopes of leaving him behind. The stranger, however, quickened his horse to an equal pace. Ichabod pulled up and fell into a walk, thinking to lag behind. The other did the same. His heart began to sink within him. He endeavored to resume his psalm tune, but his parched tongue clove to the roof of his mouth, and he could not utter a stave. There was something in the moody and dogged silence of his pernicious companion that was mysterious and appalling. It was soon fearfully accounted for. On mounting a rising ground which brought the figure of his fellow traveler in relief against the sky, gigantic in height, and muffled in a cloak, Ichabod was horror-struck on perceiving that he was headless. But his horror was still more increased on observing the head, which should have rested on his shoulders, was carried before him on the pommel of the saddle.
My favorite story.
Yes, and that's from The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. That's what we're going to delve in tonight, guys.
Yep, it's that time of year, folks. We got fall beginning to happen, and it's after the first day of fall. Weather may not look fallish out there yet, but it's getting there.
No.
Trees are starting to turn, and I love this time of year. I think everybody loves the fall.
This is the best time of year, absolutely.
Oh, God, yes. And this is always, to me, this is equal to the Christmas Carol. There's been so many versions filmed of the Headless Horseman, but I mean, my God, this is story really sets the season.
Yeah, it does. It really
does.
really does. I think everybody can equate Halloween with the Headless Horseman.
Oh, yeah. You've done a deep dive on this, so...
Yes, I have done a deep dive, and it's going to be a little bit, like I told you before we started recording, a little bit piecemeal. We may have to stop and start again because as I was doing more research after I had already written the script, I found an amazing article, and I'm going to source it
neat.
right here, right now, before I forget, because this guy took a very deep dive, and I wish I had found this before I put the script together, because the script would have been better. But it's the Classic Horror Blog, Literary Essays on Gothic Horror, Ghost Stories, and Weird Fiction by M. Grant Kellerman. And so if you guys enjoyed this episode, you need to go find this online and read it. It is long and lengthy and utterly amazing. Just amazing. So let's get started with just a little bit of the history of the area that we're talking about here. So the 2 square miles that make up the village of Sleepy Hollow always belonged to the Native Americans before the Old World colonists, Europeans, came over to the New World. This was Native American land.
Okay.
When the colonists did come over, the Dutch came over to this area, and they named it the New Netherlands. Relations between the tribe and the Dutch were pretty good, relatively peaceful, until about 1643 or so. The Dutch then started to war with several of the tribes in the area.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, this is this more Puritan Dutch, or is this more Dutch-German that we're talking about?
Well, the area was a lot of Dutch colonists, a lot of French Huguenots. So I don't know if they were necessarily Puritan Dutch, but I would imagine a good portion of them probably were.
Some, yeah.
Probably.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, probably were. In 1655, Adrian van der Donck, a Dutch colonist, first published a work which referred to the Pocantico River. I tried to get that right. Pocantico River. And he had named it Slappershaven. Or Slappers
Haven. That's very interesting.
And that literally translates to Sleeper's Haven.
Wow.
So keep that in mind, because that's going to come up in just a little bit when I talk about something else.
All right.
So Sleepy Hollow appears to be a later Anglicanized version of this name. And it actually applied to the valley near the Pocantico River. It serves as the name of the incorporated village, but that didn't happen until 1996.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
I
that's
know
quite a ways.
it was never officially Sleepy Hollow until 1996. Even though it was referred to as Sleepy Hollow from the time Washington Irving started the story and publicized it, he fought for the name of that area to be Sleepy Hollow, which we'll talk about again in a little bit. But it was never officially Sleepy Hollow until 1996, which I was so
tourist
surprised.
Trade, yeah, that's got to be. They had to do it, you know.
Yeah, they had to actually make it officially legal. Okay, so back to history. In 1664, the British seized the New Netherlands colony and renamed it New York.
It's never been right since. Yeah, anyway, for all my friends in New York, that was a joke. Yeah.
During that time, an ambitious Dutchman, Frederick Phillips, or Philip C., gained influence with the new English governors in New York, and that enabled him to buy up a lot of property and a lot of lands in the area, just along the east side of the Hudson. So that's where we're talking about here, the east side of the Hudson.
Okay.
Frederick Philip C. died in 1702. He and his second wife, Catherine Van Cortlandt, are buried in the crypt in the Old Dutch Church Cemetery of Sleepy Hollow. Philip C.'s son, Adolf, then inherited the northern half of Phillipsburg, which is what this area was called. It was called Phillipsburg. There was northern Phillipsburg, they called Upper Phillipsburg.
Now, have you seen time period photos of this or anything when you were researching?
I did find some.
Did you?
Once I found Mr. Kellerman's article.
Okay.
Yes.
I was just curious. I just wonder what that looked like. No, I just wondered.
Yes, there's several. And that area is really, the historical societies out there have really mapped everything and preserved everything. So the history is really well kept in this area.
Good.
And I just told my husband as I was leaving today that this is now come to the top of my bucket list to go visit.
Yes. This will definitely have to be one of the times.
Yes. So the families of Philipsburg were largely Dutch American, like we said, French Huguenot, Swiss, and German. Okay, so all of those were in this area.
Gotcha.
Most of them sided with the new Congress during the time of the Revolution, right?
Yes.
The Phillipses family sided with King George.
Oh.
They were loyalists.
Yeah.
Very much. So at the end of the War of Independence, the Phillipses family fled back to England. And this allowed the local farmers the opportunity to buy their own farms and their tenants.
Sure.
And the old Dutch ways really prevailed and sunk into this area big time. And that was by the end of the 18th century. Okay. So that's a little bit about the area, which we're going to delve into more once I start bringing in some of Mr. Kellerman's research on that. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. So who's Washington Irving? You know, we know the name Washington Irving from the Legend of Sleepy Hollow story that everybody knows.
Probably the most famous story that he wrote, yes.
But he was much, much more than that. He is an American author. He's also a historian, and he's a diplomat. He was actually assigned to...
I saw that.
Spain. He was a diplomat for Spain. So I didn't know that at all.
Yeah,
he lived
I didn't either.
A good portion of his life in Europe. It's like 17 years of his life was lived in Europe. He was born in New York. He is the youngest of 11 children. His father is a Scotch-Irish immigrant.
Wow.
Okay, and he was named for George Washington. I think he was born on or around his inauguration date.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's what and the stories claim that his nanny held up an infant Washington Irving to President George Washington, saying, hey, this child is here and he was named for you, and all that sort of thing.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a folklore. We don't have any, obviously, record of that. His family were merchants, so he was also a merchant, and he was a naval officer in the war.
Now, I didn't know a little bit about that. Cause
I think that's the War of 1812.
Yes, it was.
I put in my notes American Revolution, but I just had the Revolution on my brain, but he wasn't born yet. But he was a naval officer in the War of 1812.
Naval history, part of the naval officers program, you go through that. And I was very surprised to know he was naval officer, but he was.
Yeah, I didn't know. And then after that, he ended up in Europe, like I said, for 17 years. And that's where a lot of his knowledge and basis for the story comes in, as we'll talk here. Yeah. However, in the late 1790s, so he was born 1783, 1793, he'd be 10. Later than that, probably, they didn't give me an exact date, but I'm thinking 1796, 97, somewhere in there, when he was a mid-teen, late teen. Young man, right? Because in that day and age, that was a young man.
Yes.
You became of age that early, right?
Sure.
There was a yellow fever epidemic in New York. And he was sent to a relative of his, James K. Paulding, and his family. He and Paulding, I think, were about the same age. And they lived in Tarrytown. So he went to Tarrytown to avoid that yellow fever epidemic. And during that time is when these two young guys went around that area hunting, fishing, talking with the locals, you know.
Yes.
So this was 15 years after the Revolutionary War, not that long ago, right?
Exactly.
No. Or from the time he's there, after the Revolution has been a long time.
Still good in everybody's mind.
Very much so. Very much so. And so Tarrytown and the 30 miles around it are what considered kind of a no man's land, what we would think of a no man's land today, a demilitarized zone, that sort of thing. The British had command to the south of the area, and the Continental Army was staged to the north of the area. This middle ground was where double agents hung out, spies back and forth. Lawlessness ensued in the area. There were cowboys and skinners. They were actually called cowboys and skinners. The cowboys were more of a like a rebel gang type sort of, you know.
Talk about eclectic mix.
Right, yeah. Flip-flopping back and forth. Now, the Skinners, they were just completely criminalistic bad guys. They didn't care for either side. Exactly. They didn't care. And they were the nasty guys. So, in this area is actually where Major John Andre was captured and waylaid after meeting with Benedict Arnold. This is where he was captured at the Tulip Tree with the plans for West Point in his boots.
I didn't know that.
And the reason he was captured, and thank you, Mr. Kellerman, again to this article. This is what I found out today. Let's go back over here so I grab the proper notes. Which I didn't bring over. Okay, but I remember the story.
Okay.
Because the article had so much. I was just kind of bit and piecing, grabbing some more stuff, but it was so chock full of information. But Andre was actually captured because the Continental Army deserter was actually wearing a Hessian coat.
Okay.
So Andre thought he was speaking to a loyalist. So when they asked,
Yes.
what side are you on? He said he was British.
Yes.
Because he thought he was talking to British people. So he was trying to cover himself. Turned out it wasn't. He was a turncoat, almost freaking literally, right?
Yes.
So that's how he was captured. And then, of course, he was hung elsewhere. But that happened right here in Tarrytown.
You said something about a tulip tree.
The tulip tree is still there. He was captured under a tulip tree.
Wow.
And we'll get back to that one
Okay.
later on again.
I'm interested because they're one of the degrees in the Scottish Rite. We have a gentleman who plays Benedict Arnold, and we talk about the capturing and everything, but it doesn't really give a lot of information. So that was actually in Tarrytown. That's really interesting.
Yeah. And, well, I'll get more to Andre when at the end of the episode. I get back to
Alrighty.
that. Okay. So Irving began his literary career at a very young age. Like I said, his family were merchants. And the business was kind of failing. So he then took off to Europe, which is why he went to Europe, to try and help establish and bring that up.
Yeah.
But the business actually ended up failing.
Wow.
Washington Irving is also a lawyer. He went to
knew
school,
that,
became
yes.
a lawyer. Some places say he passed the bar. Some places said he didn't pass the bar. Mostly it was like he didn't really enjoy being a lawyer, so he never pursued that career.
Yeah, exactly.
But he did pursue his writing. He did essay writing, satirical pieces for newspapers. In 1802, he traveled to Europe, like I said, to improve his health and to bring up the family business. And he spent several years exploring the various countries. I think like 17 years. I think he was over in Europe.
Wow.
He went to France, Italy.
Giant vacation.
Yeah, right. England, Germany, all those places. So during that time, he began to write his first major work, which was published in 1809, I believe. And that work is, even though he's in Europe, it's called A History of New York from the Beginning of the World to the End of the Dutch Dynasty.
Okay.
So, this is going to be an in-depth catalog and chronology of New York and its history and the Dutch and all that.
Yes.
So we've got underlying our basis for our Sleepy Hollow story right here, right?
Oh, yeah. At least part of it.
At least part of it. And so this is published under the pseudonym Diedrich Knickerbocker. That's going to be important. He did a lot of his writing under this name of Diedrich Knickerbocker. And Knickerbocker is a New York term. I don't know the origins of Knickerbocker, but it's interesting because...
Well, the hotel's named after, the Knickerbocker. I don't know.
Yeah.
I assume the individual, but I don't know.
And the New York Knicks, the basketball team. And then there is a Kinderhook.
That sounds familiar.
I think. Kinderhook, New Jersey, I think. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so Knickerbocker is what, New Yorkers are called. It might be interesting one day to dive into that and figure out. If any of our listeners know what that is.
Post that on Facebook.
Tell
Let
me.
us know.
Let me know. Let me know. So Irving's most famous work, obviously, is A Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
Oh, yeah.
And he also wrote Rip Van Winkle. Sleepy Hollow came out in 1819 and Rip Van Winkle in 1817. Both of them are published in a collection of short stories that are entitled The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, Gentleman. So they didn't come out in the same publication of this sketchbook. It's like a whole series of short stories.
Wow.
And I brought with me today
this
massively thick book.
Oh, yeah.
What is that? What?
Oh,
three, 4 inches?
Yeah, if not more.
And this has got all of his stories in it.
Wow.
And so everything that was published
Did he write something in Christmas as well?
There are Christmas
Okay,
stories.
it seems like I remember several stories he had written.
It's called Christmas, The Stagecoach, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, The Christmas Dinner. And
I
as
think
I was
that's
reading through it,
Christmas Dinner is one idea.
it's just kind of like a continuation from the previous story. So
Sure.
I thought the Christmas Eve would be one story, and then I flipped to Christmas Dinner, and it was like the next day, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
So these are all of his stories from the sketchbook. Then he's got Tales from the Traveler. Then he's got Wolfert's Roost and other papers, and Wolfert's Roost is going to come into play a little bit later too. But this is a fantastic book. I so treasure this book and love it. But I didn't realize until doing this that sketchbook was actually kind of like a little pamphlet or booklet of several short stories.
Like
and
Reader's
then
Digest.
Yes, and then another year later, they would publish another sketchbook with different stories, maybe some of the old ones, but so that's where Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle.
Now they're calling it a sketchbook. Did they have illustrations in it as well?
I don't know. I would imagine they would because at that
I'm assuming,
time frame.
Yes.
I would imagine that they would have, but I did not see an original
Just
picture
wondering.
or any copies of that. Yeah, but Rip Van Winkle kind of really put a trigger into my head because of what we're talking about with Sleepy Hollow. Because like we had said, Sleepy Hollow wasn't the name of the town. It was kind of the name of the area, Sleeper's Haven.
Yes.
What's the story of Rip Van Winkle about?
Sleeping,
right? So I'm going to go straight from the summary from Britannica on Rip Van Winkle. Just for those who don't know the Rip Van Winkle story. Rip Van Winkle is an amiable farmer who wanders into the Catskill Mountains where he comes upon a group of dwarves playing ninepins. Rip accepts their offer of a drink of liquor and promptly falls asleep. When he awakens 20 years later, he is an old man with a long white beard and the dwarves are nowhere in sight. So, side tangent, divergent.
That's a really nice
We're going down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
It is a really nice way of putting the story. He falls asleep in Sleeper's Haven, Sleepy Hollow, right? Because this took place in the Catskills, which is, I think, north of the area we're talking about technically.
Yes.
But the rabbit hole we're going to go down a second, Heather. Sleeper's Haven, he's fallen asleep for 20 years. He goes in search of dwarves, right?
Okay.
Dwarves that he has heard, that everybody in the area has heard playing in the woods, right?
Yes.
And they're like, don't go after them.
Rip Van Winkle wasn't a nice guy.
No, he was not.
No,
he wasn't. And it's not a nice story, really, if you read the whole thing. But
much like most fairy tales, it is
fairy, Irish legends and Welsh legends, and
don't follow.
Don't go into the fairy circles. Do not join a fairy party. You will never get out
or drink.
Don't eat or drink anything being exactly. So this right here shows that he has just pulled all of his knowledge from his folklore that he's learned over there, and he's brought it over here, placed it into these Catskills, into these Sleepy Haven, into this Sleepy Hollow area. And I was just like, holy cow. Hey,
it all
like I
fits.
said, it all fits. Yeah. I didn't even know he wrote Rip Van Winkle, but now when I look at it, I was like, of course, it all fits. It's so cool. And
Makes
this is
sense.
why I love history.
Yeah.
This is why
sense.
I love history. So, okay, we'll come back up and get back on task here. But I just thought that was...
That's a neat connection.
And the
it really is a neat connection.
It really is. It really is.
I'm still sitting here thinking of the whole Knickerbocker thing through my head a dozen times over. I didn't know New Yorkers were called Knickerbockers. I didn't know that.
I think they are because that's where the New York Knicks got their name.
Yes.
And I've always heard that, but...
I'd love to know what the word actually means, so,
We're going to have to do a deep dive on that when we stop recording here.
Definitely.
Yeah. So throughout his life, Irving continues to write and publish. He wrote biographies, travelogues, historical accounts, all of this, right? He's known for his vivid storytelling, his humor, and romanticistic depictions of American history. Like I was telling you before we started recording, Rip Van Winkle and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow are the only two stories set in America. All of his other short stories are set in Europe. And there's actually another good one, The Spectre Bridegroom. I have read that to the kids when they were young.
That sounds familiar.
It is
I think
so
I've read
good,
that
and it
one
is
time
so funny. It's very, very humorous.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of humor in Irving's writings. So even though he is an American author, a lot of his stories aren't American based.
Yes.
But he's still a great American literaturist. I mean, he really is. And he isn't as celebrated as some of the others that we know. Nathaniel Hawthorne, Edgar Allan Poe.
Sure.
Those are more famous American
Than what
writers
he is, yeah.
than what he is. But
I'm wondering if he didn't write more than all of them put together. I mean, you know.
oh, I don't know about Edgar Allan Poe, I think.
Yeah.
But Edgar Allan Poe was much more of a dark Gothic novelist.
Oh, God, yes. Yeah.
Whereas Irving was just pre-Gothic, coming into the Gothic era, but he had a lot of humor into his Gothic
Yes.
novels.
Last year, just to digress for a moment on Poe, I and Heather started watching. They had this series and some of Poe's unpublished works, and they put it into. And it's on. What was that on? Do you remember? It wasn't Netflix? I may have been on Hulu. It may either been Hulu
when it
or
originally
Tubi.
came out, it was Fox, I believe.
Yeah, Fox. But it was only like 6 episodes. They're half-hour episodes. But one of them in particular is about a haunted. Well, it's about a teacher in a college. It's in a what kind of makes you think it's a Catholic college, and he's haunted. Remember the one where he kept coming out to the pew, and in the church and sitting there, and he finally becomes the head bishop. Remember that one? I don't remember all the details, but the house which they give him to reside in is haunted.
Oh, nice.
And so he has trouble sleeping at night, and he's supposed to be this head proctor. I'll have to look and see what the story is for that, which one that was. I thought that was really enjoyable. It has a black cat in it.
Oh,
Has all the
nice. Yeah.
typical Poe things, and we watched every one of those. I think I've actually recorded them. They're a very interesting set. They really are. So.
We'll have to put that in the show notes.
Yeah, maybe we can do something next year on Poe. That'd be kind of interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Hadn't thought about that.
Yeah,
yes.
we'll pencil that one into the calendar
yes.
for next year.
Yes.
Yeah. So, like I said, he lived over in England, and then in 1835, he comes back to America, and he moves to Tarrytown. And he buys a home that's already standing that is called Wolf's Roost. And I'll get more into that in a little bit. Again, thank you, Mr. Kellermeyer.
Yeah.
So he is bought that house. He calls it Sunnyside. Fixes it up. Everything, restores it. And then when he dies in 1859, he is buried in the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery.
Ah.
But it was actually called the Tarrytown Cemetery.
Ah.
He made them change the name to Sleepy Hollow Cemetery.
Wow.
And
Of course he
again,
did.
this was 200 plus years
he probably
before
had
it was
the-
officially Sleepy Hollow.
Sure.
Right? But,
And he had probably the influence to be able to do that.
yeah, because he wrote
He
the
wrote the
story,
story.
Oh, yeah.
right? But many other famous and wealthy people are buried here in the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
The Carnegies,
Oh, yes.
the Rockefellers, Walter Chrysler,
Hey,
in the
talking about
Chrysler
big
building.
names,
and
yes, yes.
big names are all buried
Yep.
here in the cemetery. And there's also a replica of the supposed bridge that Ichabod Crane crossed
Ah.
in the cemetery. So, I'm going to give a shout out right now to the podcast, History Goes Bump podcast.
Ah.
They've done an episode on the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and Diane and Kelly have actually visited Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow.
Oh, wow.
They were making a trip to Gettysburg,
Okay.
and there was traffic, and they got sidetracked onto another highway, and then all of a sudden
We
they
know
see,
how that works in Indiana.
right? So they see a sign for Tarrytown, like, oh my God, we're this close?
Yes.
So they immediately got off. And so it was a quick 30-minute stop for them. But you guys, they are so much fun. You really should check out their podcast. This is where I got my
History
love.
Goes Bump.
History Goes Bump. They do a phenomenal job. So,
Yeah.
but they actually went into the cemetery because they just picked 30 minutes because they had
Sure.
more of a long drive ahead of them.
So Tarrytown, how far is that from Gettysburg?
You know, I did not look it up on the map. I don't know how much of a
I was thinking
detour
that
they
was a
had
bit,
to
a bit ways
yeah, because
off,
that's
yeah.
in Pennsylvania, obviously.
Exactly, yeah.
And we're talking about New York. But they were coming
Exactly.
up the eastern coast, driving up for a long trip.
Oh, yeah.
So they probably had to cut across all
Sure.
of New York.
They probably
I've always
didn't
said
even-
that I'd loved in the fall go to New England, take Heather up. I have been to
gorgeous.
Bangor, Maine, but it was in winter. I've been to Liberty Island up through there. I've been up Norfolk, obviously, and some of those areas. But fall's a whole different thing. Get around Connecticut, Rhode Island,
Oh man,
and
just looking at those
yes.
pictures today, I was just like in awe.
Yeah.
It's just serene and gorgeous. And
oh yes,
I mean, Sleeper Shaven is a perfect name for that quiet little piece of heaven.
well, yes,
You know?
and you could drive through some of the mountains there and everything. I mean, it'd be
Through the
worth
Catskills are
the Catskills.
gorgeous.
Oh yes, I mean, I always I was recently speaking at a library, and one of the things we brought up was taps, and they actually formed out of Warwick, Rhode Island. I'm thinking, yeah, this is the place to be in the fall.
Oh yeah.
And
Oh,
some
yeah.
of the incredible displays of leaves, and I would love to take a motor home and spend a week and just drive up through there. That would be so cool.
Yeah, at least.
Oh yeah,
At
at least.
Okay, so we've hit the area. We've talked about the area. We've talked
Yes.
about Washington Irving, right?
Yes.
So let's get a little bit in to the story that he created. The summary from Britannica, as if anybody needs a summary of Sledge of Sleepy Hollow, but we're going to.
Yeah.
The
It
protagonist...
wouldn't be Sleepy Hollow. It wouldn't be the Headless Horseman without it. I mean,
Right?
Yes.
Right? So the protagonist of the story is Ichabod Crane, a Yankee school teacher who lives in Sleepy Hollow, a Dutch enclave of the Hudson River. A suggestible man, Crane believes the ghost stories and the tales of witchcraft he has heard and read. He is particularly impressed by the tales of a spectral headless horseman said to haunt the area. Crane is also a mercenary. He courts Katrina von Tassel mostly because she is the daughter of a rich farmer and is expected to receive a large inheritance. Abraham von Brunt, also called Brom Bones, is Crane's jealous rival, a local favorite and a rash horseman who often plays tricks on the schoolmaster. Late one night, as Ichabod Crane rides home from a party at Katrina's home, he is suddenly frightened by a ghost-like headless horseman. The ghost pursues him and hurls at him a round object that he takes to be a head, but is later revealed to have been a pumpkin. The schoolmaster is never seen in Sleepy Hollow again.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when he says a suggestible, that means gullible.
Yes,
Yes.
suggestible.
Yeah.
And also, the one thing that I never thought about in reading the story or hearing the story is really the character of Ichabod Crane.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a nice man. He's not well liked in the
he's
story.
looking for a free ride.
He's
yeah.
looking
Yeah.
for a free ride.
Yeah.
He wants the money. Brom Bones
he's
wants the
lazy.
girl.
Yeah.
Brom Bones wants the girl,
Yeah,
right?
he's definitely he's an educated man.
Right.
He's had a lot of education to be a school teacher, but yeah, that wasn't a trade that most men took up back then. You were kind of considered to be a bit lazy if you had an education and you were teaching school. Those were usually men that practiced law, or they were professors in colleges. If you were teaching at a scholastic level that was much higher, not a small one-room school teacher.
Right, yeah. So I never really saw Ichabod as the nemesis or
No.
not to say villain, but the bad guy in this story. I always saw Brom Bones as the bad guy of the story, right?
Well, that's the way they want you to. But I mean, realistically, if you look at it, Brom Bones is from the area. He's been courting Katrina for some time. He's well.
He's the local
well
hero.
liked.
He's a
Yeah.
local varsity football player
Yeah,
nowadays,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's the big guy.
Exactly,
And more than likely, he is a Revolutionary vet because
More than likely.
the Legend of Sleepy Hollow takes place in 1790. That's
Most
the setting
everybody
date
over here at that
Ichabod-
time were vets. They were vets of the Revolutionary War.
So all of these guys would have been, on the colonist side of the
Sure.
Revolutionary War. So let's break down the characters just a little bit. And this is where we're going to have to hit and miss because I got a lot of information from Mr. Kellerman's
Wow.
article on some of these characters.
Okay.
Now I knew,
I'm rather excited about this because
Yeah.
I like to learn about these. Yeah.
so I knew from my earlier researching that Ichabod Crane is actually a real person. There is a real person named Ichabod Crane. Okay?
Somebody named their kid Ichabod.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Poor
and if you look at the history of the name Ichabod, you know how all these names have meanings. The name
Sure.
Ichabod isn't really a good meaning to the name. Okay, so we had to cut there for a second, but I'm going to jump right back in. Ichabod Crane is actually a real person. He was Colonel Ichabod Crane, and although he gave his name to the character, that's about all he gave. He wasn't really pleased with having his name as the name of this character. Colonel Ichabod Crane is a naval officer. I would think naval officer.
Not colonel. It'd have to be either maybe Marine.
I said naval because I know Ichabod was a naval.
Yeah, it could have been the Marines were a naval facility, naval force
because they were because Ichabod.
Yeah, they were aboard ships. So a colonel might have been a colonel in the
Colonel
naval.
Crane and Washington Irving served together during the War of 1812. That's where they met.
Yeah, I bet you Dimey was probably a Marine.
Okay, that would make sense then.
Yep.
Now the name Ichabod does not have a very good meaning.
Oh.
If you actually look up the meaning of the name Ichabod, it's without honor.
Oh, wow.
So that I don't know if Irving knew that when he used the name Ichabod, or if he just liked the name Ichabod Crane.
Unique, probably.
Very unique.
Yes.
So Colonel Ichabod Crane gave his name to the character. There is a person in Ireland or Scotland called Longlegs. Right?
Well, they used to call the king Longshanks.
Yes, that was Edward Longshanks.
Yeah, Edward Longshanks,
yes. But there was a school teacher over in Ireland or Scotland. I forget now. I'm so sorry. But he was nicknamed Longlegs because of his tall, lengthy, So he gave the physical description of Ichabod. But the personality, the actual person that Ichabod Crane is patterned after, is a school teacher and a friend of Irving's named Jesse Merwin.
Probably isn't he longer.
Was he a friend afterwards?
Yeah.
Yes, actually he was. And
some people don't take it as well.
I know. Yes, they were actually very good friends. And Jesse is from upstate New York in that Kinderhook, New York.
Okay.
Is where he was a school teacher. And we're going to get back to Kinderhook again in just a few minutes about another character. Like I said, this is where it's going to get piecemeal because there's so much more information I found out from the article that I read that is not in the script here. But it's fascinating. And of course, I love the history.
Sure.
And this just compounds on how he created the story. Okay?
Yes.
So the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, Washington Irving describes the Headless Horseman as the ghost of a Hessian trooper whose head has been carried off by a cannonball in some nameless battle during the Revolutionary War. Historical documentation, however, does talk of a headless Hessian soldier. And there's actually a couple. The first, Major General William Heath, published his memoirs of his Revolutionary War experiences in 1798. And in the Battle of Hatfield Hill, which takes place on October 28th, 1776, General Heath placed a regiment and a cannon on Merritt Hill to cover Hatfield Hill. So Merritt Hill was on one side, Hatfield Hill was on the other.
Incoming artillery, yeah.
Right. The battle was taking place on Hatfield Hill.
Very good.
He put a cannon over on Merritt Hill. So on November 1st, 1776, Heath writes this in his journal about that battle. A shot from the American cannon at this place of White Plains took off the head of a Hessian artilleryman. And White Plains is only located about 10 miles from Tarrytown.
Well, that's good to know. White Plains is an upper area of New York.
Okay, so then that's where that's where Tarrytown
like Carmel
is.
or Fishers in New York.
Okay, there we go. So this is near White Plains. So if anybody knows where White Plains is,
yes,
you're going to kind of figure out where Tarrytown is in relation to that. So when it comes to this Hessian soldier, some people don't think that if this story was happening in and around Tarrytown when Washington Irving is up there with Paulding in the late 1790s, these people are going to say it's some nameless battle because this battle is a massive battle.
Yes.
And these guys are veterans from this war. They're going to know the battle is not going to be a nameless battle, right?
Sure.
Okay. There were remains of a decapitated Jaeger, which Jaeger is actually one of the Hessians, the dragoons were part of the Jaeger Corps,
Yes.
and that Jaeger means huntsman.
Mm-hmm. German,
Okay?
yeah.
Yeah, so keep that in mind. Huntsman or ranger, but keep huntsman in mind. There was an actual decapitated remains of a Jaeger, which were unceremoniously buried in the old graveyard in an unmarked plot in 1778.
Okay.
The old graveyard, the old church graveyard that we're talking about there in Tarrytown. And today he actually has a brass tablet on his grave labeled Hessian Soldier.
Oh.
Funny enough, now whether this is true or not, it is said that the body was interred there by the Van Tassel family.
Oh, okay.
There is a Van Tassel family in Tarrytown.
Okay.
Okay, and the story goes that one night the Van Tassel household was attacked by a Hessian dragoon army, and Peter and his brother were taken out and I believe killed.
Yes.
The house ended up on fire, and Elizabeth Van Tassel and her young daughter were in the house, and the Hessians went in, saved them, and then brought out blankets and a mattress before the house burned down, essentially saving Elizabeth and her daughter's life.
Yes.
So it's suggested that maybe
they had a heart,
Elizabeth Van
soft spot in the
Tassel
heart.
came across this Hessian and thought, oh, you know what? One good deed for another. Let's bury this poor gentleman, right? Mm-hmm. So those are two possible stories for the Headless Horseman. But this area being a Dutch enclave and old world Europeans, you know their folklore, right?
Oh, they're very superstitious.
They're highly superstitious by nature, and their tales and their folklore from the old country have come with them. During this time, they are terrorized by these Hessian soldiers, right?
Sure.
So a story like this could easily have been going around the hearth fires at night,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We've got a ghost of a Hessian soldier, and he's got no head, and he's walking around.
One of the things, and I like I said, this has always been my favorite story for Halloween, but my favorite, of course, is always the Disney, and I think it's because Bing Crosby narrates
Of
it, that
course.
voice. And
That-
Of course.
Yeah,
That
it-
was my first.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, and I tell you what, just the whole characterization of Ichabod being this lanky, goofy sort of guy. I mean, it's just perfect. The whole thing is, but I tell you, the one that I like the best as far as the Headless Horseman was the Johnny Depp movie where Christopher Walken plays the Hessian. And that,
yes, but that is such a different take.
Oh yes,
on the storyline.
it isn't historically accurate at all.
Tim Burton has taken it and twisted it as only Tim Burton can, but it is phenomenal.
It's
phenomenal.
the story is kind of neither here nor there.
And the body count is high.
Oh yeah.
It's like 13 or 14.
Yeah, a lot more than
Yes.
than you see in a Disney classic. But certainly, I just like the look of Walken. Walken is such a strange dude to begin
he
with.
is.
But my God, he played that well. When he gets his head and sticks, I get that weird look to him, and it just seemed like it fit for his.
Right.
He's such a unique actor anyway. But there's so many different movie pictorials of these that have been made over the years, and a lot
There's
of them are not
also one
accurate.
with Dick Butkus and Jeff Goldblum from the 80s.
I have heard, I've seen that. Yes, I've seen that.
I've never seen it.
It wasn't one of the better ones for
That's
the
what I've
actors,
heard.
but yeah, it was. It's like the Christmas Carol. I own about I think 16 different versions,
Right,
including one where Henry Winkler, the Fonz, plays the Scrooge, and I mean, there's a lot of them out there.
Oh, I
and
totally
mean,
know that one.
Oh yes, I have that one. I
one.
have a bunch of them in my collection.
The Muppet one is the best.
Yeah, the Muppet one. Yeah, you gotta love the Muppet one. The Muppet one is just that's Jim Henson inside now.
Right.
But it's one of these things that when you look at this, it's being a Knight Templar. A lot of people ask me about Kingdom of Heaven. It's a great movie, and of course all the women like it. It has Orlando Bloom, but it is also one of the most inaccurate and historically inaccurate movies you've ever seen. Great to watch, but there's not there's no accuracy whatsoever in any of this. Yeah, but
Yeah, I mean, no one can find any stories or any folk tales of a Headless Hessian before Irving writes it.
Yes.
However, as we all know, folklore, it's oral tradition. So these stories could have been going around the campfire when he and Paulding were there in 1790 as fire ghost stories.
I think me and Heather both can say military stories will go along a lot of times and never leave One thing, and of course we don't do much cryptozoology, but there is a story of a Sasquatch. It's up in Virginia at
It's Quantico.
Quantico, yeah, and it's called
Scary
Harry. And her dad was at Quantico, so I immediately asked him, "Did you?" Of course, being a Marine station up there, and he said, "No, he didn't hear any of that." But most of that came out in the 70s. There's, during Desert Storm, I knew a lot of guys that came back and were telling tales about the desert
And the redhead man.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, there's a lot of those that don't always make it out unless you're a vet talking to another vet and you're exchanging the story or you're scaring your grandkids. Other than that, you don't mention
Desert Storm
it.
was 90s.
Yes.
Yeah.
You said 70s.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
No, he was talking about the 70s, and then we moved forward to Desert Storm.
I'm aware it was in the 90s.
Yeah.
I remember it distinctly, but yes.
But I mean, and in these small towns,
Yes.
And my dad retired in the middle of both of those.
Yeah.
there was really no written lore anyway. It was all oral lore.
Oh,
all
yeah.
of it. But there is a New York ghost story retold by S.E. Schlosser.
Okay.
And this is purported to be the story that Irving heard around the campfires that was told.
Yes.
That maybe sparked his idea for this
Okay.
legend. And it goes, one cold winter night early in the new year, a certain Dutchman left a tavern in Tarrytown and started walking to his home in the hollow nearby. His path led to the old Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, where a headless Hessian soldier was buried. At midnight, the Dutchman came within sight of the graveyard. The weather had warmed up during the week, and the snow was almost gone from the road. It was a dark night with no moon, and only one light came from his lantern. The Dutchman was nervous about passing the graveyard, remembering the rumors of a galloping ghost that he had heard at the tavern. He stumbled along, humming to himself to keep up his courage. Suddenly his eye was caught by a light rising from the ground of the cemetery. He stopped, his heart pounding in fear. Before his startled eyes, a white mist burst forth from an unmarked grave and formed into a large horse carrying a headless rider. The Dutchman let out a terrible scream as the horse leapt toward him at full gallop. He took to his heels, running as fast as he could, making for the bridge, since he knew that the ghosts and evil spirits could not dare to cross running water. He stumbled suddenly and fell, rolling off the road into the melting patch of snow. The headless rider thundered past him, and the man got a second look at the headless ghost. It was wearing a Hessian commander's uniform. The Dutchman waited a good hour after the ghost disappeared before crawling out of the bushes and making his way home. After fortifying himself with schnapps, the Dutchman told his wife about the ghost. By noon of the next day, the story was all over Tarrytown. The good Dutch folk were divided into their opinions. Some thought the ghost must be roaming the roads at night in search of his head. Others claimed that the Hessian soldier rose from the grave to lead the Hessians in a charge up nearby Chatterton Hill, not knowing that the hill was already taken by the British. Whatever the reason, the Headless Horseman continues to roam the roads near Tarrytown on dark nights from this to this day.
Yeah.
So, what I read at the very beginning is almost
exactly the same story.
Right?
Yep,
So,
very much so.
who knows what came first, right?
Well, sure. Yeah.
We just don't know. But we do already know that Irving spent a lot of time in Europe, as we've talked about.
Sure.
And it's safe to say that his exposure to European folklore and legends influenced not only his story style
Sure.
and the atmosphere that he wanted to incorporate, but the eerie and supernaturals, folk tales from Germany,
Sure.
from Ireland.
And see, I can't speak much on Ireland and Germany, but when I was in England, I'll tell you, the older folks, and I say older because I'm older, so I qualify in that area, but they're very superstitious, and they'll tell stories. Younger people, much like in the United States, they really don't pay much mind to it. They don't take a lot of the folklore or the legends, really to mind, and they
take
certainly
it as seriously.
No, and they don't memorize it and be prepared to pass it down. Where a lot of generations before that was their duty to pass it on.
Right.
And that was a pretty common thing. And I remember we were talking about, as soon as everybody found out I was interested in ghosts, everybody's got a story they want to tell you. And, especially when you sit in the pub and you're killing time and you're drinking. And, oh, my God, yes. Everybody had one story or another,
Right.
And I think that's pretty standard. Nowadays, it's just different.
Well, nowadays, we all tell our stories. I mean,
Sure.
we have a podcast talking about
Oh,
supernatural stories, right? And there's so many
what
out
better
there.
way to tell it?
We all tell stories. We all have it. But back then, and even especially times before electricity, I
Sure.
mean, when it gets
Sure.
dark, it gets dark.
Dark,
all
dark,
you've
dark,
got
dark.
is candlelight.
Yeah.
The darkness outside is unknown. It's scary.
Oh, yeah.
It's fearful.
Sure.
And these aren't just stories. These things are real to these people, right?
Well, one of the worst walks home was from the tavern to your front door.
Yeah.
Because most of the taverns, if you lived in a small city, it probably was not that terribly far away. But by that time at night, the only body that was out was the people leaving the tavern. And it wasn't a 4 o'clock closing time back then.
If you're on a lonely moor or on a hillside in the highlands somewhere.
You took a farmer, he's not in town.
No.
Yeah, that's a bit of a walk.
No. So,
even with a horse.
We said the Hessian soldiers were in the Jaeger Corps, and Jaeger was huntsman, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hessian soldiers are German, right? So the Hessians, they're German soldiers.
Yeah, they were mercenaries brought over.
Well, they were loaned from the Prince of Hesse-Kassel, which is an area of Germany, very little industry. So they relied on their soldiers of fortune, their soldiers for hire.
That's who brought the money back.
But those poor Hessians didn't get that money.
No.
The prince got that money from King George. The prince of the area got that money from King George. And like I said, Jaeger means huntsman.
Yes.
In German lore, and I'm going to mispronounce this because this is German, I'm not German.
This is where you get to wonder what Jägermeister.
Right.
I'm just saying, yeah. If you think about it, we know what that word means now.
Oh, gosh. Don't
Master
ever
Huntsman?
drink Jägermeister. Yes.
Yeah. No, I like licorice, but I don't like Jägermeister.
No,
I never cared for it.
It's called Der Wildjäger, or the Wild Huntsman.
Yes.
Okay. He is a figure in Germanic folklore. He's depicted as a spectral huntsman who leads a ghostly procession through the night sky. The legend of the Wild Huntsman varies from region to region, and some actually are on horseback, but others drive a carriage, a horse-drawn carriage. Okay?
Ghost Riders in the Sky.
There you go, right? So he's depicted as in hunting attire, black horse, or a spectral steed. Kind of think of Thestrals from the Harry Potter, right?
Yeah.
Thestrals.
Black Mariah.
Yeah. The huntsman himself is portrayed as a skeletal figure or a ghostly apparition, and the legend of the Wild Huntsman has inspired various works in literature and music, like we just discussed, right?
Yes.
He's all out there. Encountering the Wild Huntsman is considered a bad omen. It is believed that those who witnessed the hunt may be taken away or cursed. Okay?
Okay.
There's a similar specter, and I think even scarier specter, in my opinion, in Irish folklore, called the Dullahan.
Okay, now I'm familiar with that.
The Dullahan is terrifying because you cannot escape the Dullahan. You can't. He is described as a headless horseman. He carries his own head under his arm, and the name Dullahan translates and means dark man or man with a black head.
Okay.
So according to legends, the Dullahan, much like the Grim Reaper, is a harbinger of death, and it's associated with misfortune.
Okay.
He rides a black horse, and he carries a whip made from a human spine.
Wow.
He's depicted as malevolent and terrifying. He is said to have a grotesque appearance. His head is either decaying or skeletal, but the eyes constantly move and dart around. And he can hold that head up high to look as far as he wants.
Yeah.
And his mouth is a wide, toothy grin. And he rides out like a Grim Reaper, harvesting a soul. Not just any soul, a certain soul. And he will say that name on the wind as he rides until he finds that soul he is supposed to harvest. You cannot escape the Dullahan.
A reaper, basically.
Basically a reaper. You cannot escape the Dullahan. Once he is after you, he is after you. You can hide, you can go in the house, you can offer him gold. The gold may stop him for a little bit, but it will not stop him permanently.
No.
Now, if you cross a Dullahan on his ride, and you're not the intended soul, you could become blind or deaf, either temporarily or permanently. So you don't want to cross paths of the Dullahan.
Definitely
if you
not.
hear a Dullahan coming, you hide and pray that he's not coming for you.
This reminds me of the story of the Irish talk about the little people. You never follow them in their hunt. And if you witness them in their hunt, you could very easily be captured and never released.
Right. Right.
Let's go ahead and take a quick break. Ghost to Ghost is sponsored by Spirit Indiana Paranormal, covering the Hoosier State since 2002, Indiana's oldest paranormal investigation group. If you're experiencing what you believe to be paranormal issues, reach out to us for help at www.spiritindiana.com or our hotline at 317-883-9103. Again, that is www.spiritindiana.com. Our hotline again is 317-883-9103. Thank you for listening.
Okay, we're back. Thank you so much, Zarzar, for that little interruption. But that actually was a good segue because we're going to jump back a little bit into some of the character history.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So we've mapped out where he's gotten the Headless Horseman guy. Uh-huh. The Hessians were in the area. Okay, so he drew on Germanic lore to bring that Headless Horseman and the Dullahan in, right? So it's a story, right?
Yes.
It's fiction. It's not based on real people. But as we saw with Ichabod Crane,
Ichabod
was a real person.
Exactly, yeah.
He wasn't the only one.
No good. Well, we know the Hessian was there.
The Hessian was there.
Van Tassels.
Tarrytown, the Van Tassels were there, absolutely. It turns out that the Van Tassel, I said Wolfert's Roost, was the Van Tassel home. Okay? Wolfert's Roost is the home that Washington Irving purchased in 1835 when he moved back to Tarrytown, and he named it Sunnyside.
So he purchased it from the Van Tassel.
He purchased the Van Tassel home, and that's what he lived in until his death. Okay. So Van Tassel's a real name. I'm not going to give you more. If you want to have every breakdown of these characters, you have to read Mr. Kellerman's article that I sourced earlier.
That's very interesting. I like that article.
Because he breaks down everything. And Catherine Van Tassel is based on a real person. Okay?
Okay.
Brom Bones is based on two people, actually.
Yes.
And they are both named Brom, and they are both blacksmiths.
Oh, really?
In the area. Yes, absolutely. Now, the one that I did pull out, and I'm going to read straight from Mr. Kellerman's article here, because not only is it interesting that Brom Bones' character is brought from this person, but it also involves Jesse Merwin, who is the character base for Ichabod Crane, right? Yes. Okay. Now, this other Brom is a Kinderhook, New York's Abraham von Alstein. He's from Kinderhook, New York, same as Jesse Merwin.
Okay.
According to local tradition, this Brom helped inspire the idea of a prankster wrapped in sheets and mounted on a horse when he pranked the schoolmaster Jesse Merwin. Poor and low in confidence, Merwin was resisting his friend's hints to pop the question to his long-suffering fiancée, Jane Van Dyke. So Merwin is not popping the question, and Jane is getting very bothered by this.
Getting antsy.
Yep.
So bothered by Merwin's lack of initiative, mutual friends met and designed a Charivari, Charivari. It's a rustic hazing ritual.
Oh, okay.
Meant to frighten ambling lovers into either marrying or calling it quits.
I've never heard of it.
I hadn't either. I hadn't either. One night after leaving Jane's house, Merwin found himself being followed by a spectral horseman muffled in fluttering drapery. The stalking developed into a race, with the shapeless specter suddenly disappearing in a cackle of familiar laughter. Thank you, Brom van Alstein.
Oh, yes.
So, taking the hint, Merwin proposed and married Jane Van Dyke rather than suffer a lifetime of similar assaults by his friends. So there we have the headless specter riding after and chasing the school teacher.
Yes.
Now, different twist, obviously, because this Ichabod, this school teacher, got his fiancée.
Yeah.
He got
the Disney one, he goes to a different town and marries, supposedly, is the rumor.
Right.
So, yes.
So, and actually, Mr. Kellerman says that the people of Kinderhook, New York, have actually been trying to get Sleepy Hollow not necessarily erased from the map, but they claim that Ichabod, or that Washington Irving is actually talking about Kinderhook, New York, because
Yes.
here's Brom Bones,
Yes.
you know, their blacksmith von Alstein, and Jesse Merwin, their Ichabod Crane,
Yes.
and they did the spectral ride. He's
Sure.
talking about our town.
Yes.
We need the fame.
Oh yeah.
No, because
It's all about commercial.
well, it's not necessarily all about commercial, because
Sure.
we're talking about the hauntings of Sleepy Hollow and Tarrytown today.
Yes.
And I'm going to go back to my book here for a second,
Okay.
because not only does he talk about the area Tarrytown,
Yes.
but he also talks about
Kinderhook.
no
No?
hauntings of Tarrytown.
Okay. Okay.
So here we go here.
These are previous to his story, so these are.
These are previous to his story.
Okay.
This is actual real legends that take place in Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow today, and they are in the legend of Sleepy Hollow. The immediate causes, however, of the prevalence of supernatural stories in these parts was doubtless owing to the vicinity of Sleepy Hollow. There was a contagion in the very air that blew from the haunted region. It breathed forth an atmosphere of dreams and fancies infecting all the land. Several of the Sleepy Hollow people were present at Van Tassel's, and, as usual, were doling out their wild and wonderful legends. Many dismal tales were told about funeral trains and mourning cries and wailings heard and seen about the great tree where the unfortunate Major Andre was taken, and which stood in this neighborhood. Some mention was made also of the woman in white that haunted the dark glen at Raven Rock, and was often heard to shriek on winter nights before a storm, having perished there in the snow. The chief parts of the story, however, turned up upon the favorite specter of Sleepy Hollow and the Headless Horseman, who had been heard several times of late patrolling the country, and, it was said, tethered his horse nightly among the graves in the churchyard. So right
Got
here
a
in the
little bit
story,
of banshee involved there too.
well, when you
Well, there were a
look,
lot of Irish in that area too.
Oh, yeah.
yes,
Yep,
Dutch,
yep.
Irish,
Sure.
French, Huguenots, like we said earlier. So there was already a prevalent supernatural history going on. So let's break down just a couple
Okay.
of the hauntings there today still.
Okay.
We talked about Major John Andre. Let's go into him just a second more. On October 2nd, 1870, he was hanged in Tappan, New York. But visitors say that his ghost has gone back to where he was captured. The sound of horse hoofs can be heard echoing down the road, stopping at the exact spot where Andre was captured, under the tulip tree. Maybe he's trying to succeed in his mission. Maybe he wants to claim another side. Instead of saying British, saying I'm American.
Yeah.
Or maybe he just wants to locate the young miss that he had a crush on. He was a well-known poet, and sometimes you can hear poetry whispered on the wind
Wow.
around that area.
Well,
Right?
Yeah, it's plausible.
It is plausible. We have Raven Rock that we just mentioned in Washington Irving's
Yes.
story, right? Raven Rock is a legitimate Sleepy Hollow ghost. It's a craggy glacial scar named for its eerie tendency to attract the gloomy blue birds, the ravens. A ghostly woman in white has two different backstories. The first is that she was a desperate single mother gathering firewood to heat her cottage before a blizzard, but that she was caught off guard and froze to death under Raven Rock. The other states that she is a young girl who had arranged to elope with a British officer. She arrives in her dress at the rock on the appointed date, but he doesn't appear. Instead, a blizzard begins to fall, and she remains steadfast waiting for him, but death overtakes her. Either way, the lady in white moans pitiably there in the snowstorms, and has been observed in Sleepy Hollow since colonial times. So
Wow.
this was already a story before Washington Irving
before.
even wrote his story.
Yeah, it certainly had some influence. You have to look at it that way.
Yeah. The other legend is Spook Rock. So not Raven
Okay.
Rock, but Spook Rock. It's a Native American tribal princess who ran off with her lover against her father's permission. The couple paused at the rock to take a breath and to rest when a sudden storm blew up and flooded and swept the lovers and drowned them. And a young maiden is said to still haunt this spot with her moans and wails in the air. And, of course, Sleepy Hollow Cemetery is also said to be haunted.
Yes.
Before and after, because before we heard those stories of the
Every
Hessians.
town has to have a white lady. I mean, or
every
a
town
haunted,
has a white
or
lady.
or weeping
Yep.
lady in the cemetery. I mean,
Yep,
yeah.
every town. Okay, let me go through my notes here real quick. There, we got that.
You know, I see so much, though, folklore coming out. You know, when we talked earlier about not crossing running water, the ghost won't cross running water. You know, and of course, later on, after it's been candy-coated and rolled around 4 or 5 times, we get the fact that the ghost can't cross the bridge. But they never tell you why they can't cross the bridge.
And just in our previous episode, Fisher's Ghost, same thing.
Yes.
The ghost disappeared on the bridge.
Yep.
Lots of tales say
Yep.
ghosts can't cross water. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I mean, we get tales of spirits crossing oceans to go visit family members
yes,
after
yes.
they've passed. So that's an interesting one. I tried to delve into a little bit, but it was so all over the place that I just don't.
I've done a little bit of research on it, but it goes, you know, and some of this I think goes back to Viking lore, and we're getting back into that religion and the fact that, you know, that there was territorial divides, and those were divided by running water and rivers, and they weren't allowed to pass.
Oh.
I don't think it's necessarily what we think, because ghosts can pass through most things that they desire to do.
I
so.
would think so. I
And-
think it's basically a structure of the folklore and the fiction.
Yeah.
You need
I
a way
believe
to be
that.
safe,
Exactly.
and that they've made that
Well, and back then,
as your
you
barrier.
didn't cross rivers. And, you know, they didn't, especially a lot of places, if you were going into town, it had one bridge. That was it.
Yeah.
So otherwise you stayed out. I mean, even, you know, in a lot of Christian religions, when they were baptizing people wanted to be baptized, had to wait to spring, because you couldn't take the chance on catching pneumonia and dying,
Right.
which was very much a possibility of becoming ill if you've been in ice cold water. So, I
Right,
mean, you know,
right.
certainly that's part of it.
Well, the last one we're going to discuss here, and certainly by no means the only one, because there are more that I didn't go into.
Sure.
Is Sunnyside itself, Washington Irving's home, which I didn't realize was actually Van Tassel's home when I
Yeah,
wrote the
that's
script.
kind of interesting.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. So when he comes back in 1835, it sits on the bank of the Hudson River, and most of its furnishings are still original to the
Wow.
Irving family. He lived there with his nieces and some other family, but it is said that he and his nieces are still seen in the house today. They still haunt the home Sunnyside today. He likes the tower known as the Pagoda Tower, and supposedly in 2010 there was a photo taken that seems to show a ghostly figure of a head and upper body holding a quill pen.
Ah,
Now,
okay.
I couldn't find that anywhere.
Okay.
I looked for it, but I couldn't find it. But I believe that it might be in a book that I'm trying to track down, and I don't know the name of the book, so that's why I'm not going to say it here, because I've got to find that out. But if I do find it, I'll post it on our Facebook page, guys, so you'll know.
Very good.
So this is where I was going to end, but I'm just going to say one more thing again
Yes.
about Mr. Kellerman's article. You guys need to open it, because in the bottom part of the article, he actually takes a modern day map of Tarrytown,
Yes.
and he traces Ichabod's ride from the
Wow.
horseman, and it follows this country road. I think it was State Road 9, and he follows it and he maps it out, and he's got pictures, and he shows where this would have happened and that would have happened. It's
definitely
just
wanna look that up.
Oh, this article is great. Again, it's the Classic Horror blog, literary essays on gothic horror, ghost stories, and weird fiction by M. Grant Kellerman. You guys, you got to pull this up and read through it. It's about a 20-minute read. It took me a long time, and probably a little bit longer, because I was looking at the maps and the pictures. He shows pictures of the bridge and what it might have looked like, where the bridges were, what bridge it wasn't. Just, really, that is an amazing article. The other sources I had were www.sleepyhollowny.gov. The Blurry Photos podcast did a great breakdown, and they've got some really interesting literary examinations of the storyline and the plot. And then Elizabeth Bradley with the Historical Hudson Valley. She's got a book, Knickerbocker, The Myth Behind New York. She gave me a lot of the information on Washington Irving and his background.
Mm-hmm.
So, check those out if you guys want more.
All right. Well, I tell you what. Again, this is always my favorite episode. It's been a lot of fun tonight. So I want to wish everybody a happy Halloween.
Hold on.
Oh, we got new news.
Well,
Breaking news.
I did a little Googling while sitting here,
Oh.
because, that's what I do. Knickerbocker.
Oh, yay!
Oh, okay. We have news on the term
Well,
Knickerbocker.
It's a couple things came up. According to NBA.com, the term Knickerbockers traces its origin to Dutch settlers who came to the New World, especially what is now New York in the 1600s, and it comes from the pants that they wore. They rolled up past below
of
their
course,
knees.
that's right. That's right, Knickerbocker pants.
Yep,
Yes.
that makes sense.
Ancestry.com says it's an occupational name, and this is for the last name, and it's originally Knickerbacker, as in marble baker, a baker of children's clay marbles.
Wow.
Oh, interesting. Emma thought it was maybe a boxer who was boxing in his undershorts.
Well,
They're knickers. And
I
she
think
saw
they did that a
knickers
lot in the
box-
Navy. I mean, they had some that, who knows?
Well, boxers did box in their
In
knickers.
boxers. That's why they was called
And
boxers.
everybody's
yeah.
favorite website, Wikipedia, on their other uses, we had the Knickerbocker the baggy knee trousers. There was a USS Knickerbocker, a Navy tug minesweeper,
Oh, I didn't know that one.
who was in commission from 1917 to 1919.
The poor bastards that end up on a tug.
There was a
Oh,
Knickerbocker Glory. It's an ice cream sundae.
We really delved into Knickerbocker.
yeah.
Of course, Knickerbocker.
Well, they
Central-
actually, you were
the-
talking about
the train.
boxers.
Yeah.
And that's
And
how.
there's a Knickerbocker, Texas.
Oh.
And Knickers.
Oh yeah. Well, when they boxed back then, because that comes from the Greeks when they originally boxed, because Greeks would fight nude. I mean, totally nude.
Yeah.
So, and the same as the Romans. So when in the Navy started out, they would put their skivvies on, which was basically their boxers, and that's how those got named that way, because they would fight in their boxers. Because back then, women were allowed aboard ship, and they could get away with it.
So I did forget one thing. As you were talking about the Knickerbockers, it reminded me of something. Ichabod Crane came into Sleepy Hollow as an outsider, right? And we
Yes.
talked about how Brom Bones was the hero
Yeah.
of the area. People think that it's a pumpkin because pumpkins are associated with Halloween, and it was a jack-o'-lantern because of Halloween.
And they said it was round.
But it's not, is it? Because we
No,
know
they
we
did
know
turnips originally.
that turnips were the
Yeah.
original jack-o'-lanterns,
jack-o'-lanterns.
right?
Yeah.
And pumpkins were not associated with
But the
Halloween
Irish brought the
until the
pumpkins.
1860s.
Yeah.
No, actually, the Yankees
Mm-hmm.
loved their pumpkins. So a Dutch enclave throwing the pumpkin at Ichabod is like somebody throwing an orange at a Floridian, like, go back home. Go
Okay,
back home.
so we have
You're
some
not
inner
wanted
meaning
here.
Yes.
There's more meaning. And of course, Mr.
Analogy,
Kellermeyer
yeah.
brought that up to my attention.
Wow.
That the pumpkin was actually more symbolic of get out of our town.
Get out.
You don't belong
Yeah,
here.
he ran it on a rail.
Yeah. So interesting.
Okay.
But so many
Now,
avenues
we've
to
had
go
a good
down.
deep dive
This was a
tonight.
fun one.
It's been
This was
very much fun. Well, folks, thank you so much once again for listening to Ghost to Ghost. We want to, on behalf of myself and the ladies, we want to wish you a very merry, happy Halloween. We ask you to be safe and be careful out there, but enjoy the holiday. So that is all we have for tonight, and this is the conclusion of tonight's episode, Ghost to Ghost. We hope you enjoyed this evening's episode. The episode Ghost to Ghost was written by Jennifer Verne. It is now time for a Ghost Story of the Day with Jennifer Verne.
Today's ghost story of the day is from Hoosier Folk Legends by Ronald L. Baker. Headless Ghost of Tramp at the Free Springs Bridge. Southeast of the city limits of Sullivan, Indiana, there is a place called Free Springs. A small stream runs parallel to a railroad track, and there is a narrow gravel road that crosses the railroad tracks and a bridge over the stream. According to legend, there was a body found under the Free Springs Bridge sometime in the past. This body was headless, and no one could identify it. It was generally supposed that it was the body of a tramp that had met foul play and been dumped from a train passing through the area. No great effort was ever made to identify the body, and it was buried without a head. Ever since the body was buried, there have been many reports of strange noises and sightings of headless beings around the Free Springs Bridge. This legend is common knowledge among the teenagers of Sullivan County, and a favorite pastime of many of these is to go to Free Springs in the dead of night to see or hear the ghost.
Thanks for listening to Ghost. Again, I'm your host, Chief Lawson. You can find Ghost on all major formats on the 15th and 30th of the month at midnight. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, maybe have a question or subject you'd like to ask about on air or be used on the show, please email us at ghosttoghost@spiritindiana.com, ghosttoghost@spiritindiana.com. I want to thank my production staff on Spirit, Jennifer Verne, our research manager and our producer, and Heather Lawson, our trainer on Spirit and our podcast director, for helping make these podcasts possible. My chief of staff, Andrew Brooks, for his guidance and help on the scripts, and everyone else involved. Thank you so much. See you next time. Until then, stay safe and remember the truth is out there. Good night. Ghost to Ghost podcast and its contents is the property of Spirit Paranormal Ltd., all rights reserved. We welcome you to download and play the podcast and share with others for personal use. You may not, except with written permission, use or distribute its contents for commercial use. Spirit Indiana Paranormal, covering the Hoosier State since 2002, Indy's oldest parapsychology investigation group. If you're experiencing what you believe to be paranormal issues, reach out to us for help at www.spiritindiana.com or call our hotline at 317-883-9103. Again, that is www.spiritindiana.com or our hotline at 317-883-9103. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself and the ones you love, and be safe out there.